Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Kaplan, Director of Education at YIVO, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Eve Jochnowitz. Eve, how are you?
Hi, Ben. Thank you. I am very grateful to be enjoying good health.
So Eve, you are a scholar and you are the translator of the Vilna Vegetarian Cookbook. You're someone who has investigated deeply Yiddish foodways and many aspects of Yiddish language and culture. So let's start with the question we always ask, what are you cooking these days?
I am sheltering in place on my own. So the big challenge is I am learning to cook for one. Very against my normal nature. I had a conversation not too long ago with a friend who was recently widowed, and
Hmm.
he said, there is no such thing as an Italian recipe for one.
Wow.
And I would say the Jews are just like that, but even more so.
Hmm. Yeah. So, right. You have to, if you're going to have pasta, you're going to have a Jewish recipe. You have to be feeding the whole family. Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh, no, go ahead. What were you going to say, Eve?
Oh, let's see. I am becoming a great partisan and patriot of Michigan local ingredients. We're very proud here of our thistle honey, of our sour cherries, of a kind of fruit called pawpaws. Do you know what pawpaws are?
No, tell me.
Did you ever have to sing a song in kindergarten way down yonder in the pawpaw patch?
No.
Pawpaws are a relative of another tropical fruit called a soursop, but also not very familiar. They are very sweet and creamy. They are sort of lush and flowery. They taste like a tropical fruit, and it's a real surprise that they are native to this cold northern environment.
Wow.
They are actually an ideal ingredient for cheesecakes because they are so soft and mild and creamy, but also they have that sort of minor key of a little
Hmm.
bit of cheesiness in their flavor.
I'm going to have to check it out, see if we have those anywhere near New York. I don't know if we do.
I think in late summer you can get them in the Park Slope farmers market, but I'm not sure.
I'll investigate. So, Eve, one of the things you are expert on is Jews and vegetarianism. So let's start with that. Is there such a thing as Jewish vegetarianism? What is the Jewish tradition of vegetarianism, and what is Jewish about it?
Okay, that is a great question. I would say that there is not one tradition of Jewish vegetarianism.
Mm.
I don't think you could draw a straight line from Rav Kook to, I don't know, Jonathan Safran Foer. Uh, it, um, but you will have a lot of Jews who are very interested in vegetarianism. They don't always come to it for the same reason. Uh, I would um, I would start out by saying that Jews are, not to speak in generalities, but to make a generalization, Jews are very interested in food and cooking, and thinking about food will frequently steer someone towards vegetarianism. And vegetarians will frequently have a lot to say about being vegetarian. And on the other hand, we also have Jewish anti-vegetarians who are very concerned about the threat that Jews being vegetarian might pose either to Jewish tradition or to Jewish religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have articles in the Yiddish press that are very concerned that the delicious flavors of traditional foods such as knishes, which can be vegetarian, will be forgotten because young Jewish women and men, but I think they're especially worried about the women going astray, are getting interested in these new, strange, non-Jewish things. Vegetarianism is a big one. Another one, eating out in Chinese restaurants. Way back at the turn of the century, we're concerned that Jews already are just loving Chinese restaurants too much. And going to the supermarket and buying these strange new products like mayonnaise.
Oh, goodness.
Uh, But it's very interesting. There are two sides, because you could, as a non-vegetarian, you could look at vegetarians either as heretics, which is sort of the more modern point of view, or you could see them as practicing a chumrah, a stringency, as being even more devoted to Jewish tradition. And there is Pauline Vengerof's memoirs, Memories of a Grandmother, written at the beginning of the 20th century, but remembering, or the end of the 19th century, but recalling her childhood in the middle of the 19th century. Wow. She recalls that there was a guest in her home, in her parents' home, who ate no meat. And then she says in parentheses, nowadays we call that a vegetarian. The word did not even exist in the middle of the 19th century. And her parents really loved and admired this guy very much. And her mother went to extraordinary lengths to make food that would be suitable to him to eat. And he would not even eat from dishes or utensils which had been used for fleischic foods. So he used the strictures, he applied the strictures of kashrus to vegetarianism. And Yiddish homemakers, Jewish homemakers, do not usually take kindly to other people telling them that their kitchens are not kosher enough. Right. That is the balabusta, but in this case, they really went out of their way to accommodate this vegetarian, although he was not called a vegetarian, because at that time, when vegetarians were still pretty rare, sure, they were not seen as a threat to Jewish tradition. They were seen as upholding Jewish tradition, or at least in this one family saw this one Jew as upholding Jewish tradition. And later, when vegetarians become more populous, they are seen as more threatening by some writers, by some journalists. I mean, we have what exists in writing. We have Jews start out coming to vegetarianism for humanitarian reasons, but later on, people become interested in the health food movements that start at the beginning of the 20th century. And the history of nutrition plays an interesting role here, because proteins are discovered in the 1830s, right, but vitamins are not discovered until 1912. Oh, wow. So for a big chunk of history, vegetables and fruits are thought of by serious nutritionists as junk food. And we even have records, this is not particularly Jewish, but it's fascinating, social workers and nutritionists in Boston at the turn of the century were trying to reform the eating practices of Italian immigrants, and they're wringing their hands. These uneducated people have such terrible practices. They're eating all these fruits and vegetables, all of this junk food, and we're trying to get them to eat more meat and white bread, which is so much more good for them. And they had the best intentions. Right. So tell us a little bit about the Vilna Vegetarian Cookbook, because you translated it, and I'm sure there's so many things you could tell us about it, but maybe just briefly, something that you found particularly challenging about that process and something that surprised you? I guess my first surprise was that it existed. I had already, this is in, I guess, all right, you know how old I am. In the 1980s, I started getting very interested in vegetarian cookbooks and Jewish vegetarian cookbooks in particular. And I came across a couple of fascinating cookbooks. One is co-authored by Abraham Michelot and Shifra Michelot. This was published in New York in 1926, Rational Nourishment. And the title just tells you, these people are coming to vegetarianism not, maybe not primarily for humanitarian reasoning, but because it is rational. And in the 20s, being rational, well, perhaps in every era, it's fair to say being rational is a big deal, but especially in the 20s, this was a big movement among Jews, and the Michelots want nourishment to be rational. Lena Brown writes a cookbook in the 30s, Kochbuch für Gesundheit, cookbook for health, and her approach to vegetarianism, in addition to other things, is it makes you, or it can make you healthy. And she specifically writes about the quality of her health changed when she emigrated from a small town close to green spaces in Europe to the inner city crowds, noise and pollution in New York. And she wanted to restore a little bit of health, and for her, vegetarianism was a big step of that. Also a regimen of many different kinds of baths, cold baths, hot baths, steam baths, and what she calls an air bath, walking around naked at least a couple of minutes every day. And then we have Fania Lavando at the end of the 30s, and she is really coming to vegetarianism from a completely different point of view. Mm-hmm. She is actually she is much more accomplished, both as a chef and as a writer, than these other writers are. Although I love them all. They are all so interesting, and they all come up with so many curious approaches as to, are we going to try to imitate meat? Are we going to try to imitate traditional Jewish foods? Getting back to your question, which you may have already forgotten, what's Jewish about it? Lots of people in this era are getting interested in vegetarianism. Jews occasionally will try to draw a straight line from Tanakh to Jewish vegetarianism. The title of one book published in 1895 is Loi Sirtzach, Thou Shalt Not Kill. This is also the title of a beautiful poem by Menke Katz on the same subject, that how appalling it is to be eating, especially the babies, the youngest animals. I'm sorry, I forgot the beginning of my sentence.
You're talking about Jews and vegetarianism.
Oh, yes, so what's Jewish? So Jews, Judaism clearly has a history and a tradition of meat eating, and especially fish eating. What are you going to do if you're not going to eat meat or eat fish? The Zmiris, which are a fascinating Jewish tradition of song associated with food, will occasionally mention unspecified matamim, delicious things. So we love delicious things on the Sabbath. But when they mention specific foods, it's always meat and fish. And it's always in that order, interestingly, which is the opposite of the order in which they are traditionally eaten. Well, we can get back to that later. And so if you're a Jewish vegetarian, what are you going to do about meat and fish? Are you just going to say, okay, here is rice dumplings stuffed with wild Polish mushrooms with mushroom sauce, and that's pretty delicious? Or are you going to say, here is a vegetarian dish which looks and almost tastes exactly like gefilte fish? Or are you going to do a little bit of both? Those are some of the challenges that the Jewish vegetarian author is reaching for. Who are you writing for? Are you writing for people who are already committed to vegetarianism? Or are you writing for their mothers-in-law who are very skeptical and need something to coax them around?
Sure. All right, well, I have so many questions, Eve. I don't know where to start, but and we might have to do a continuation at some point. There's a lot to go.
I got no place to
go. Well, you're in the kitchen. I'm sure you're cooking a whole bunch, so that's good. So as someone, I guess to leave people with for this video, as someone who cooks a lot and also studies the food ways so much, from your perspective, what do you think is the unique advantage to cooking at the same time that you're learning about the food history?
Mm,
That's a big one to tackle in just a few minutes.
it is a big one. And actually, fortunately, it has been tackled. Well, I don't know if it's been answered, but it has been addressed by a lot of our colleagues who work on klezmer music, because a lot of them came to study the history and traditions of klezmer music out of their love of playing klezmer music, and others fell in love with playing the music from studying it. I think I well, I mean, everybody loves, well, generalization, maybe not everybody loves to eat. I love to eat, and from a very early age, I really loved cookbooks. Even before I could read, I remember the ones with the pictures, the or even just line drawings. I love to page through them and think about making the foods myself. I think that if you start with the history and then you actually make the food, you get a much better understanding
Mm.
of um, what the people you're studying were doing. And I'm just looking really at 19th and 20th century sources. That's not so difficult. I know Barbara Ketchum-Wheaton, who studies cooking of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, has really done some extraordinary work on making these recipes with only the equipment that was available at the time, and has learned a great deal about what the flavors of those times and places were. Architecture, the recreation of the Grodowicz synagogue in the Polin Museum was done entirely with period tools and materials, just not just to make the recreation more authentic. Authentic and recreation are two words that frequently go together in food and music and architecture. Uh, but to put the bodies of the people, to connect the bodies to the artwork. And I guess that's really what food and cooking do. You connect your body to a work of art. A Jewish Shabbos feast is a Gesamtkunstwerk, a complete work of art with song and food and smells.
It seems to be a common theme in the course and everything we've been doing, that visceral experience. I love that metaphor that cooking and eating is like playing a klezmer song or building a synagogue or any other work of art you might be engaged with. Eva, I'm so happy we were able to chat. I hope we have a chance to chat again soon. Your lectures in A Seat at the Table are so wonderful. People can check them out. You do a lecture on Zemiris, and you do a lecture on Jews and vegetarianism. For anyone who is particularly interested in those topics, Eve's lectures are very rich with information. They can visit yivo.org/food. And Eve, we can follow you on your blog as well, right?
Yes, please do. It is inmolaran.blogspot.com, INMOLARAAN. That is the Central Yiddish pronunciation for into one's mouth.
Great. So everyone check out Eve's blog, check out her lectures in A Seat at the Table, and we'll talk again soon, Eve.
Thank you.
Take care.